Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris with Regular Guy Training. Today I have Colton with
Autonomous Defense.
Yay! Look at that. So today we just kind of stumbled upon this this video concept because we hear a lot of people talking about a lot of different things, and there's been updates to this argument over time. To the argument in general over time about okay, so do we use a colluminator style or LED style red dot, or are we messing around with holographic style sites like the EOtech or now the Vortex that's out, right? So there's a lot in my mind. There were a lot of old arguments that don't matter anymore, but there's still stuff that's out there that's pretty relevant to both. So both of us have experience using both. I have significantly more experience with let's fix that. I have significantly more experience with EOTechs and holographic style sites than he does, which is kind of funny considering I don't have one on here and he does. Also, fun fact, you just jumped on the lefty train for a while now, so you're just gonna cut yourself and hate it for like 6 months at least. But point is that okay, so experience.
So all my experience so far has been messing around with like Aimpoint T2s. I've been running them on AKs and ARs for a little while now. I've run them in a whole bunch of different environments, real hot, real cold, rainy, muddy, clay. I've never really had any issues with them whatsoever. But whenever I started messing around with EOTechs or holographic sites, there were little things I was picking up on that started to pique my interest with them. And fuck.
Thanks, phone. Side note, this starburst stuff going on that C4's got is a little fucking ridiculous. It's delicious. So,
tangent.
Sponsor us. Sponsor me. I just got through Brotober. Fuck y'all.
So, most of my experience has been messing around with like Aimpoint T2s. I haven't really messed around with like HoloSense or cheaper red dots out there. I've always put up the money for either Trigicon RMRs or Aimpoint, what have you. And anytime I ended up messing around with EOTechs, I would notice that my shooting would improve significantly as far as like accuracy and stuff, and I could be faster with it on targets that were closer. So much so that I went and traded a far more expensive ACOG for this particular optic because
it was the baby cog, right? Like the 1.5 power?
TA44.
There you go.
Right. Ended up trading that for this because this was in essentially brand new condition, because it kind of had all the little advantages that I wanted to, because I'm still messing around primarily with dot optics instead of more magnification like LPVOs, just where my skill set is.
Fun fact, the guy that picked that up, I'm upset at you because the holidays came and I couldn't put up money for it, and I wanted to make a Gordon carbine with like that baby cog on there, right? It was perfect for it because it had a mount ready to go, like ready to go for a carrying handle. Dude scooped it up because I was doing holiday stuff and I was like, oh, I'll have a light for it. And then like 4 days later, like, I'm sold. So I want to just hatchet things through my wall. But yeah, and I get that too. There are some people that see the opposite, right? As far as just like personal preference, where it's like, well, the big freaking donut is distracting, which to a point I get, having used both a lot, right? So, well, now we're going to talk at least like objective advantage, disadvantage for both. You can start with what you've used more, and then I can start talking about old advantages that don't work no more, but the stuff that's still relevant with those. So, go.
I mean, when I'm messing around with like aim points and stuff, I don't really have to give it much thought, right? It just stays on the rifle. I pick it up, go anywhere, anytime. I can just use it. Every now and again, depending on like lighting conditions, I still have to like adjust the brightness to it. But for the most part, I don't have to give it a whole lot of thought, right? And on the primary rifle I have it on, which if you go look at some of my stuff on Instagram and YouTube, you'll see it on like my 11.5. I keep the gun nice and light. It's tight. There's not a whole lot going on. I don't have a whole bunch of shit bolted to it that I need to think about. And I can just constantly rely on it, right? Over time, the only thing that's really changed with the, aim points that I've had on my AK and on my AR is just the mount heights. And otherwise, I don't have to give it much thought.
I mean, as far as like the teaching side of the house and that kind of stuff is concerned, because you've helped me teach a bunch of classes and that kind of stuff. You're doing your own thing, of course. So As far as that goes, like we know for sure that if dude's fucking around with like a hollow sun on his gun or he's got an aim point on it, generally speaking, because we've seen everything break, or just straight up not work out of the box or whatever. But generally speaking, if dude's got a hollow sun or an aim point or whatever, it's like, okay, that battery's gonna run. I don't have to worry about it randomly shutting off on him, like, because he's like, we've seen it before, where a dude would go change the battery on his EOtech, where we're like, cause auto shut off. He hadn't seen that before, right? Because after like 6 hours, I think they turn themselves off.
Yeah.
So, we generally know, okay, it's gonna work. It's gonna be on like forever. Like Aimpoint Comp M4. Okay, I already did a review on this. Like a single AA battery lasted longer than my friggin' marriage.
Right, and like my Aimpoint T2, I actually had it die on me recently. It was like 2 months ago. It lasted me a solid 4 years, right? And that's with, we come out here and do shit in the dark, or we do shit on super bright days in the middle of like Mississippi where we have sand that's just adding to brightness.
Yeah, and that's not like just sitting in your house where you got it toned down a little bit because you play with your flashlight inside. No, it's like outside training, firing a lot of bullets. You're cranking the brightness up a lot because the world is bright, turns out, when you go outside.
Yeah.
So 4 years of a single, it's still 2032 batteries, right? Okay, so I haven't run a T1, T2 style optic in forever for whatever reason.
Funny enough, one of the complaints that people have about these optics with, that and the auto shut off, you present the gun and the reticle's not there. It's actually what happened, right? Like I got out of my car at this range at night, got all set up.
All right, cool, ready. Yeah, that's it.
Wait a minute.
Nothing.
Fuck.
Yep. So that kind of stuff basically happens. Okay. So, but yeah, they're on, they're constant on, just good old reliable type optics, right? And like I've carried, like an EOtech style optic. It was an older one, but I carried, an EOtech, on deployment and stuff. And getting around that isn't like the hardest thing ever, but you're sitting there messing around, doing what you got to do, just day to day. Okay, it doesn't really matter if you're on patrol or not. I'm gonna make sure that this is on. Press up, press down, right, on brightness. Okay, we're cool, right? Knowing that you're gonna burn through batteries faster. So like every week and a half to 2 weeks, I'm sitting there like, oh, crank this off, battery. So it happens, right? And it was just how you got around it because, I really enjoyed the reticle and that kind of stuff. And we'll get to reticles more here in just a second. But, just living with an Aimpoint or a hollow sun or something similar it's just easy, okay? Insert battery, turn on, leave on, end of day, right?
I mean, also to like that point too, is like dudes just walking around with like their rifles slung up at class and like that. How many times do you like check the safety on your rifle, right?
Yeah, just sitting there, you're standing there, and you just thumb it, make sure it's on or whatever, right?
Like how much of it is an extra thing to like deal with and think about in the back of your head, right? But like, I mean, we already do a lot of shit like that anyway.
I mean, and for the guys that are like, oh, it's an extra button or whatever. I mean, yeah, cool, yeah, sure, fine. But how many times have you gone to like your bedside rifle and just like before you go to bed, just neat? I mean, to me, that's not as much of an argument just because if you know the equipment, and if you keep up with it, you keep up with it. Now, there's a valid argument to this. For instance, individual self-defense, like bedside guns and that kind of thing, there's a lot of guys that are like, I'm not exactly into snatching up a rifle and then having to touch a button when I have like real issues to deal with rolling out of bed at like 2 o'clock in the morning. That makes sense to me, right? Because if your brain immediately goes to, okay, get action, right? Sure, yeah, I get that that's a valid concern, right? Some guys, they don't see that as much of an issue, and in the event that, okay, battery's dead or, friggin' whatever, right? There's a couple of different practices that a lot of guys use to just kind of get over that. Is you get a couple of reps because it's got shorter battery life and that kind of stuff. You have a couple of reps of shooting through the TV, right? Or they just permanently have their front sight post flipped up all the time, every time, to where in case this shuts off or like in the middle of just a thing that they're doing that lasts way too long or battery dies or whatever, they have a reference so they can shoot through the tube. It's okay, fine, whatever. Friggin' that technique or that practice has been around since dots have existed on guns too. So, that's one of those know your equipment kind of deals. But I understand why people are like, I really don't want to roll out of bed at 2-3 o'clock in the morning dealing with stuff knocking around the house and people being in there and having to turn on the thing. Okay, I got that, right? Other guys will say the exact opposite, where they're like, it's really not a big deal. Like, as I'm picking it up, press button and then go to work, because if it auto shut off, and it does, and then you press a button on it, it goes back to the previous setting that you had it on.
And I mean, another thing too with that is, like, for a lot of people, they may not need to be as fast as humanly possible, right? I'm living on the second floor where I'm staying right now. There's a bit of time that I have, and I'm not living with like kids, and I don't have to go searching throughout the rest of my house to deal with anything like that, right? And most people that are like, gun-minded and shit like that, a lot of times they also kind of take security stuff pretty seriously too. So they'll have little things set up to delay, let's say, a home invasion, for example, right?
Tell me you have a messy house without telling me you got a messy house.
There's that. Legos and shit.
Okay, so, but realistically speaking, it's like, okay, there's ways around that, right? There used to be an argument for EOTechs, honestly, that was just kind of like, yeah, well, I have like no parallax, basically. But this argument was more valid back in the day where, like, there's a schoolhouse, like, way back where dude refused to allow Aimpoint T1s in class ever because of the parallax shift, right? It was valid because it was demonstrable, right? Like, I've used them before, and, I knew that more or less back then, like, parallax was a thing for everything, so, you do your best to keep the dot center in the glass, that kind of thing, but even still, it was provable. That was a thing you had to watch out for. Now, like for instance, Aimpoint Compound 4s, pretty good parallax. Modern, like, T2s and a lot of holosuns that are out, compared to what used to be complained about before, have no parallax, basically. And they still do. They definitely still do, but compared to back then, it's way, way, way less. So it's not really an argument that you can make for that anymore. Also, the circle dot reticle itself, that used to be a thing that everybody argued for all the time. It's like, well, this is the only one that's doing it. Well, that's not the case anymore, because HoloSun does that. Like, I love having a circle dot reticle on a micro type dot that I threw on a Draco that I put like a bajillion miles on, and that's an LED. The circle dot itself is actually cleaner. That's a pro / sorta con. We'll get on that here in a second, but still, it's not the only one that's doing it.
And that actually is one of the reasons why I wanted to pick up like a proper EOTech, is because most of the dudes I know that are running that sort of reticle are running it on the HoloSuns, right? You start to lose some of the reason that you would want to pick something like this up when certain optics start messing around with like different reticles that you can't get elsewhere, right? It's one of the reasons why the ACSS is so interesting, because you get a couple of ACOGs that have it and you can't really get that on other optics out there. Same with like LPVOs. Other optics out there from like, Leupold and just other companies, you don't have as much variation, and it doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon that you get reticles like that in their type of optics.
Well, and the thing is too, okay, now that we're just fixated on this, let's talk about this, right? So clear LED helps for people that are like, it's right there. And there's a lot of people that, especially in the past, were like, AR15.com was a place that people actually like look for information. I know that's weird to even say, because you fucking shouldn't, but there's a lot of people that are just kind of like, even back then, like, oh my god, I just paid almost $700 for this optic and it's fuzzy. Well, there's sort of a reason why the image on these style optics is a little fuzzy, because first of all, they're basically like fighter jet HUDs. Actually, that as far as the technology goes, that's basically it. Right, as far as the images that are projected. Now, they're a little fuzzy, and the objective, like, good thing to that is, if I'm trying to do my holdovers further away, we're not even talking about up close, but if I'm trying to shoot something, like, further away, the 1 minute dot in the center, which, like, HoloSuns and junk don't have, they still have, like, a 2 minute center, right? Because they can change to dot only and that kind of stuff. So it's a 2 minute center. So you lost that. So you have a more accurate 1 minute dot in the center. And because it's a little fuzzy and that kind of stuff, if you tone down your brightness a little bit, it's actually kind of easier to do accurate holdovers further away, because if you tone down your brightness, if you have the ability to, of course, you can measure out like real proper holdovers at greater distances, like 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 yards, and you can hit stuff with an EOtech mounted on a friggin' gun. Okay, that, and because it's a 1 minute dot and it's smaller, you can make really good holdovers farther away. You know, that and just EOTechs in general, like that style reticle is like, okay, 6 o'clock tick in your circle and you got little ticks. 6 o'clock tick is your close range holdover, almost exactly from like 0 back to like 10 plus yards. And of course, yeah, your mount height, now that people are getting taller mounts now, that changes a little bit. But as it comes out factory, like lower 1/3 and that kind of thing, and we'll get to mount height here in a second, you know, that 6 o'clock tick being your holdover, that's a big help. Or you back up a little ways and you're dealing with a sprinting target or a driving away target for people in those billets, right? You can use your left and right ticks as lead indicators. You know, so just things like that, they honestly, to me anyway, they really do help just figure things out. And if I'm trying to range targets and that kind of stuff, and we can talk about using red dots and stuff as rangefinders later, because you can, but having good references to that kind of stuff and making sure that my holds are good and my measurements are fine with reticle stuff that I can use for like good references is a really big help personally.
I mean, it just kind of sounds like we go straight into like the advantages, like a lot of the advantages in my experience and why I even picked this thing up, right? Because I was zeroing a whole bunch of different rifles, right? I had a whole bunch of different rifles with different triggers, different barrel lengths and all that. And what I noticed was when I was zeroing any of the rifles with the EOtech, the guns that should have been more accurate or were more marksman designated, right? I ended up shooting better with flatter face single stage triggers that there was an EOtech on those rifles, right? I had a 10-3 with a super dynamic 3-gun trigger and an SBA 3 brace, right? That was proned out shooting with an EOtech on it, and like quarter of a dime size group, like real small tight shooting, and the longer barrel length rifles, right? So a 16-inch with like an SSAE with just a holosun optic on it, right? They're fake point essentially. It was less. The grouping was actually less tight and took me a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Right. Just each gun I had picked up that had an EOtech on it, I would shoot far better than I expected myself to do.
See, and the funny part about this really is that like long list of factors that help with shooting straighter in everything that you just said, right? But the one thing that is absolutely like demonstrable for all this is that if you have larger dots, literal larger dots that you're using, you're giving up a little bit of vision, right? Because you back up to 50 yards and you're trying to get a prelim 0 for like a 200, right? And you're covering up an inch with a 2-minute dot. You back up to 100 so that you can dope check before you go out and cure at 200. We're covering 2 inches. We back up to 200. You see what I'm saying? So we lose a bit. I mean, obviously you can still get the work done, but if you have a 1-minute dot, it's still much tighter because it's easier to see. And again, you dial it down a little bit, you can basically see through it. And if you're using these as you're supposed to, meaning I'm looking at the target and dragging the dot over, still focused on that target, okay, it makes for very tight shooting at greater distances. Let's say I'm trying to zero, let's say I'm trying to collect dope, whatever. I can still do those things significantly easier. And then when we're talking about, you know, live issues, seeing better is seeing better. So there's that. Now, getting off the reticle a little bit, here's some additional stuff that you guys may or may not have thought about, right? So let's talk about night vision, because everyone talks about night vision. Okay. Now, there are a bunch of different ways that we use sighting systems with night vision and that kind of stuff. So let's say traditional right-handed, let's say PVS 14, because that's the most common right now. So, you know, traditional right-handed, we got a monocle coming down on the left hand, right? Because that's where it seems to default to, right? You know, we're using the monocle on the left-hand side, shoot laser with, and, you know, for a long time that was like it, right? Shooting passive meant that we're dragging the friggin' tube over this side, or we're using a set of PVS, you know, 31s or whatever. So now we're using both tubes. I can shoot passive, right? Now there's a couple of issues. With tube-style optics, whether it's a larger tube like this or smaller, it doesn't really matter all that much. It doesn't transmit light as good as, you know, for instance, just one of these or one of those, right? It's actually, even with a lower 1/3 mount, it's pretty easy to do several techniques that work out really well, to the point where the fact that I can shoot left and right-handed actually really does help now, especially dealing with like near peer adversary. Meaning, I'm worried about those dudes shooting lasers at me. So, for instance, let's say that I need flexibility because I could be going inside, I could be going outside, I could be dealing with a lot of different stuff. I may need white light a bunch. I may have to take advantage of the fact that modern night vision auto gate's really good. So if I have white light, it just kind of trims itself down, so I'm not doing like the really old school thing where like wash out or get retarded bright for no reason. So, or like the really old PVS 7s, like one tube, drop both, and they'll just straight up turn off. That's not frightening, you know? Like, so if I have a monocle down on the left eye, right, I'm using one of those, it's way easier for me to simply superimpose drag over to where I have my night vision stuff on this side, but I can still see a red thing on this side because I have both of my eyeballs open. It doesn't require me to tone down the brightness of that to, air quotes, NV settings, okay, which a lot of people are starting to figure out. NV settings are really not like the most useful thing ever. I don't have to tone that down simply because I can see the contrasted image over the green or the white phos or whatever I've got going on this side. Nigh impossible with a lower 1/3 mount, for instance, which again is still the most common. I get it. People are getting taller mounts. That's not what I'm getting at right now. But I can use that. Okay, I can use that. I can use a lower 1/3 mount on it. I can still pick up the red image on this side, the whole thing, because it transmits light really good. And I can still use my regular night vision on this side. So if I have to go into a structure, for instance, and I have to go white light or whatever, or somebody turns the friggin' lights on, or I have near peer adversary and I'd really rather not shoot lasers everywhere, I can still use that contrast off of that monocle and I can do what I gotta do. Now, if it's truly dark, okay, because that monocle's coming off of the left-hand side, I can simply switch my shoulders and I can pick up that image off the left tube. Whereas I have to do some craning and a bunch of weird crap just to get this to line up, and it's much more difficult to do with a tube-style optic. With something like this, okay, stay. With something like this, I can simply switch over, and even if it's on a lower 1/3 mount, I can still use this. And even if the reticle itself is in the upper half of the glass, because I'm craned over a little bit, and my optic itself, like the night vision, is dipped down a little, it still transmits enough of that light into that dipped down optic, and I can still more or less keep pretty close, it's not the same, pretty close to a posture that I normally would if I'm just throwing my head behind this optic, which is another reason why some guys try to sling their optics forward on the receivers, so that it clears that shit. Make sense? So, yeah, that's why we don't pull all the way back here. And advantage is that I can keep the lower 1/3. It doesn't help as far as posture, but it does help as far as just having things that I can use here. So as far as like regular ass backup irons and that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's optimal, but what I am saying is that it's doable. It's all doable right out of box if it's one of these and I'm trying to use a set of night vision. So now I can back these settings down and I can use this through, passive aiming pretty easily, right? And I don't have to worry about shooting lasers constantly. Because something that I've absolutely learned about doing a lot of shooting in the dark, especially with night vision and that kind of stuff, is, you don't really need to illuminate friggin' everything. You really don't. There's a lot of guys out there that have a lot of really high-tech equipment like malls and that kind of stuff that don't train in the dark, and they don't realize this illuminator is really, really nice until I'm dealing with near peer adversary, which a lot of people have night vision now.
And on that point, it's like, there's a lot of people that have night vision, a lot more people that are starting to get into it, right? Especially with ammo prices being what they are, more people start taking interest into it, right? So the fact that I don't have to go and buy a whole bunch of other shit, and the fact that I can just use this the way that it is, but just train more, right? Going left-handed right now is going to greatly aid in that fact later down the line because I plan on just running one tube.
Yeah.
Right. The investment into 2 tubes, right, or even a really good laser, which if I have to buy it, I might as well buy one that is actually really high end,
Yeah.
which is gonna.
I'm not saying don't buy a mall, by the way. I'm just saying, one of the reasons why the mall, one of the reasons why the mall is really, really highly touted is it just dwarfs the ability for everything else out there to illuminate stuff. And the lasers are really high quality too, right?
Yeah, and like that being the case, if it's just a matter of, well, I can just train more with it, I would take that over anything else because one's a gigantic investment in money already, and the other is like, well, I just got to work a little harder.
Well, and here's my thing too, right? I like the mall. I like its overall performance and that kind of stuff, but there is a thing I don't like about it, and it's its inability to be seamlessly left or right-handed. Right, because you have that pad and that big ass thing that pushes out to one side or the other. Like, I'm still a fan of D-balls and PEC 15s, okay? Not because they outperform them, but because they're just a little bit easier to use under both sets of circumstances. Because look, I get it, especially depending on what billet you're in. You got helmets and wires and communications and all kinds of stuff to deal with. However, if I can just switch over from one side to the other, and now I have the capability to use my laser on either side, which, by the way, you can with, like this is an older D-ball, okay? This is an A2, A3s are out there, obviously, and then you have PEC 15s. Like, just the ability to use it really easy with both hands is actually really important, especially talking about what we just did. The difference between shooting passively, or I can just keep that red image on a superimposed side. It is what it is. Now, higher mounts, sure, they help with both of these things, but the point that I've been trying to make the entire time is, fighter jet HUDs, turns out, they work out really good in the dark if you're trying to transmit light from one source through to another source, which is yet another tube on your face. And because they have really good parallax to start, I'm not too terribly worried about using the upper half of the glass on lower 1/3 or not, if I have a higher mount. So there's that. And by the way, so all of that stuff said, right? Some of the advantages they've had in the past, they just don't have anymore, right? Because, modern collimator sighting systems, and this is not that, this is older, right? But modern collimator style sights, reflex, whatever terminology you want to use, depending on what it is, they've caught up in a bunch of different ways. But because of that thing's flexibility, daylight, night, that kind of stuff, to me, anyway, I retain my original thought process as these are probably the best offensive sighting systems out there still. They're not quite as flexible in some ways as like a low power variable with like a RMR or something slapped on it, right? But man, they get a lot of stuff done. They get a lot of stuff done real good. There's a couple of cons on them now, but I mean, even when EOtech was getting bashed for temperature changes and that kind of stuff, which they didn't handle it good, but the whole problem that they had was extreme temperature differences, shifting, dope, basically. They still work really well.
I mean, talking about a different column with them, right? The battery life being a real big thing for a lot of people. I mean, honestly, I'm one of those dudes that played a whole bunch of video games his entire life. So, like, how many times in, like, video games do you have, like, serious resource management going on all the time where you just don't use things and you just have tons of them, right? Like stem packs and Fallout, or just pick a video game. Like, you have tons and tons of shit that you're like, I might need that later, right?
Yeah.
I really don't have any problems just changing out the batteries regularly, even if I don't really need to, right? All the other little advantages that it has, I mean, I'll take that over whatever extra money I had to spend on the batteries and just dealing with it. It's just one other little thing, but we deal with stuff like that regularly. And like, everything about these guns now are way easier to maintain and deal with in the first place. Dudes that had much older style rifles back in the day could use them and fight with them real well, just understand their equipment. So like, it's a relative thing, right? Just how much extra little shit you want to think about or have to worry about, and I just don't see an issue with it, frankly.
I mean, using the video games as a reference is kind of funny. A bunch of people are going to giggle at that, but it's like, if your brain is already geared toward understanding this stuff and managing what you got to manage, again, just like you, I don't really see that much of an issue personally. You just got to know what you're working with, really. I've been this guy has been like on a bajillion different guns, and it's not even the updated one that has a slightly taller mount on it and that kind of stuff. Like, to me, it's really not that much of an issue. And the kind of cool benefit about being really flexible as far as being able to run a rifle really well on the left or right hand side is that, like I said again, and being able to have that light transmission in there that is just really easy. I mean, I can keep both my eyes open. I can use the good contrast, by the way, that you end up with a red image coming over the top of like your green or your white phosphor or whatever. Just being able to keep both of those images in there, being able to use both of those, right? And if I have to, I can go white light. I can deal with this just auto gating, but I can see everything I'm supposed to. I can use my white light. I can do what I got to do. Let's say again, if I go inside a structure or anything like that. Or if open field or in the woods on a patrol and I really want to dial, all of my light sources down, right, to the point where I'm paranoid a little bit about having that on a, air quotes, low light setting. So I'm powering that down. So, and I'm not shooting lasers at anything, but I'm still running passive, and I can still, switch over to this side and go to that with just a couple of presses of a button. Much easier than on something like this where I have to use a taller mount now in order to use this effectively at all, right? Because trying to shoot passive with this is doable on this side if I got a tube on this side. Trying to go over to this side, almost impossible to have a red image in there. I've tried it 1,000 times. I've tried to cant rifles different ways. And I'm talking a lot to, like my troops with standard issue equipment and that kind of stuff that have their lower 1/3 or their absolute co-witness mounts. It's friggin' impossible. To try and do that on right side with left eye tube. So you see what I'm getting at here. So there's advantages that still exist. And again, the main advantage for these guys, really, because I know we've been talking about EOtechs a lot, is insert battery, turn on, keep on, end of day. Like, that just seems to be like the biggest strength, is that there's just nothing else really to deal with. But if I'm now turning the lights off and I'm exploring everything revolving around that, that's when my mounts get taller. That's when, we're starting to see like the prevalence and popularity of like the Gordon carbine and that kind of stuff, where dudes are just not using lasers at all, strap a light to it, got a nice tall mount, air quotes, because it's a freaking carrying handle that they're bolting to, which is actually pretty secure, by the way. It's getting popular now because people are like, oh, this actually is dope. It works pretty good. But having that flexibility roped into everything else that I can use different types of equipment for, put myself into different situations, flexibility, knowing what I've got, and training my ass off so that I can use them all is more where I align my expectations and my wants. So if it's time to go do stuff under a lot of different circumstances, and I'm going to be working day, night, that kind of stuff, and I'm working under night vision a ton too, more than likely, instead of getting a taller mount for an Aimpoint, I'm just going to use a Vortex or a much more literally combat tested optic like an EOtech XPS3 or something like that. So, and again, taller mounts will help you. I'm just explaining this all around.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much where I start and end on this. Is there anything else?
No, that really about covers it. I guess the one other thing that we could mention is the fact that this particular model just comes with a really nice quick detach that's already on it. And with the little benefits that the 1 MOA dot gives you, if you start throwing magnification, right, whether that be from a flip to side or a flip to center with like the Unity Fast, you do have that little bit more potential of things that you can get away with, and it just being a little bit easier.
Yeah, and just talking about tube style dots and that kind of thing. There's a lot out there. There's a lot that just straight up don't come with mounts. That one did. It was like the old Torx mount, right, where they click over. Most Aimpoints straight up don't come with mounts at all, and about every QD mount I've ever seen from Holosun kind of sucks. So it's kind of nice to just pick that up. It's like what, $600 something like that.
Used to be. I think it's gone up a little bit, but everything has.
Yeah. So I mean, round about that price range, and you already got quick detach there, and it's pretty freaking easy. Oh, also, those tend to work out pretty good as far as just not being a pain in the ass with like your magnifiers and stuff, as far as getting them adjusted, making sure everything is straight and that kind of thing. So, little side note, but I tend to not use magnifiers, so whatever. Unless you're using like a Unity Fast, that's actually a good idea. So, yeah, I mean that's it for me. By the way, Autonomous Defense, he's starting out a channel. He's got some good stuff on it. Go watch him. If you guys want to come out and train with me, you might run into him. It depends. But I have other stuff that's out now. We're going to Pennsylvania, Ohio. Shit. I got a bunch of private courses that are getting done at the same time also. Mechanical rifle and pistol classes going down in March here. So that... And I get it. It's March, which is why I'm keeping it to mechanical rifle and pistol. Everyone just got through Brooktober, you know, little less as far as the round count, but you can still come out and train. If you want to take advantage of Patreon, that kind of stuff, train with us as much as you want. Abuse that system for $41 a month. You can absolutely come out and do that. We're on Facebook, all that shit. Links for all this in the description below. I'm done with plugs. Do you have anything?
Not really. I mean, I got an Instagram, the same name and title. I got a Patreon too, but I'm not really expecting much from that because I'm still putting out content and videos of my own, and I haven't been doing that as of recently because Brooktober and other things going on anyway. Yep. But if you want to go check that out, all that's posted on the channel. That's really it.
All right. Well, that being said, guys, remember, regular guys' firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Easy.